Welcome back. In this video, we are going to get started using variables. Variables are going to be a tool that allow us to use text that we can enter here and then run it through a certain algorithm. We're going to use a very simple algorithm here, of course, but basically a tool which will then take the number that we are entering and will compare it with the actual number that the computer thought about. And at the beginning, we're going to use a fixed number that the computer will think about. So we're going to hard code the number in, but later on, we are going to see how we can generate a random number here for as well. So let's get started by checking out what variables are before we're going to use them in our C# code. All right, so first of all, what are variables? Well, a variable is a container that can take a value and store it. And maybe after some time, we decide to store another value in the same variable. Well, let's look at this trivial example. Imagine you are in an open buffet and you want to take a cup of coffee along with an amazing cake. You would need a cup for the coffee and a plate for the cake. Because a cup of coffee is made in order to take liquids, not a cake, putting the cake in a cup of coffee would not work because it won't fit, and probably because people will stare at you and think you're crazy or something. So that's not a good option. This is exactly how variables work. If we compare variables to our cake coffee example, a variable must have a type, which is the type of plate or cup that you're using. So are you using a plate? Are you using a cup? Are you using something else? The type of variable will tell us what kind of data it can store, where the data in our example would be the food or drink. And because we usually deal with many variables in our games, we will need to distinguish between our variables by giving each variable a name. So we need to have a type, a name, and then the data that we want to store inside of that variable. In C#, this is how we define a variable. So let's say we want to store an integer number, and an integer number is a whole number like 1, 2, 3, and so forth. So here, int is our variable type. Then we have the name of our integer variable, and here we are using I am a number as the name of the variable. And then we have the data, which is the 5 in this case. So we're using the value of 5 as the data of this integer type variable, which has the name I am a number. And at the end, we have a semicolon because that's how we have to finish our statements in C#. And here we are using something called snake case, where after every single word, you have an underscore. So I underscore am underscore a underscore number. And by the way, here we are using the snake case way of writing a variable name. So you can see we have I as a word, then the underscore, next word, underscore, next word, underscore, next word. And this way of defining your name is called the snake case. Now let's look at some other data types in C# besides the int data type that we just saw. The most important ones that we will need to know about for now are going to be the float, which we use to store float numbers, meaning numbers that have a decimal point, like in pi, where you have this decimal point, so 3.14, the dot is the decimal point, and we can use them to store values like the speed, for example. This is going to be in general important when we are working with physics in game development. And you can also see when a number is a float, you have to add the f at the end of the name. So here you can see 3.14f for this variable, and of course the semicolon. And then we have the boolean, which stores a value which can be either true or false. So here, for example, the boolean, starting with the bool name, m underscore I underscore a underscore paper underscore cup. So am I a paper cup? And true as the data or value for that variable. So this variable will now hold the value true, which means it will be a paper cup in this particular example. We will use this to store values like is a player in the air, to allow the player, for example, to double jump. And then we are going to use strings quite a bit as well, which we use to store text. So we need to use the quotations here to specify that these are actual text and not code. So here we're saying string, which is the data type, my name, which is the name of the variable, and then we are setting the data to be Dennis. So that means Dennis is going to be the value that will be assigned to my name, to this variable. And as you see, we're using quotations to make sure that this is going to be in fact a string. So whenever you're working with text, you're going to use strings here. We can use them for things like names, but also for story elements in your game and so forth. What you can also see is that we're using suddenly a different way of writing a name. So here we're not using the snake case as we did with the Boolean here, but we're using the camel case, where you don't have an underscore that separates two words, but it's just the first letter of the next word is written in capital case. So here you see my, and then capital N, aim. So my name. And this is different to what we see here, where we used the snake case. So you are free to use either way. Usually, however, in C# and Unity development, the camel case is preferred, which is this one here. But it really depends on the company that you're working for. They might have a different way of naming their variables. And in the end, it's really just a matter of style. So you are free to call your variables as you like them. And then we have the char, which stands for character. And we can use it to store a single character. So here in this case, we're using something like an @ or a $sign. We can use them to store special characters because if all we need is one character, then a string is going to be an overkill since it takes more memory, which will make your game less performant. So if you want to make your game as fast as possible, be always considerate about memory. The more variables we declare, the larger the memory our game is going to require. Think of it as if you are using a very huge coffee cup to store a small amount of espresso. That's not something you would want to do. And the difference to a string, as you can see here, is that we are using a single quotation mark. So you're not using the double quotes, but the single quotes. So the apostrophes here. Okay, so that's it for the theory of variables. There are a bunch more different data types, but we're going to cover them once we get to them. For now, these 5 data types that we have met, including the integer, which is not on this screen that you can see right here, are going to be the ones that we're going to use. So see you in the next video where we're going to use variables in our project.